All right, so let's do this. And just a warning or a quick disclaimer before we get started. This is going to be unscripted, and you guys know me and how I tend to, ramble. I can be rather long-winded. So this could end up being an hour-long episode, featuring some guy just talking about, losing his beloved dog, their pet passing away. So if that sounds like something you're not interested in, you might want to just turn around and leave now. I have given you fair warning. So you guys may have seen a very kind of brief, perhaps even curt message that I posted on both the Weekend Out Facebook page and on Twitter. I'm paraphrasing myself, but it was something to the extent or effect of, "Sorry guys, no show this week. My dog had to be euthanized a couple of days ago," or something like that. And following that, I just completely backed off of social media. First time I've done that in a while. And, I'll see my Facebook app on my iPad or whatever, and I'll see that there's like 41 notifications or whatever. So I apologize to you guys who I usually interact with via, Facebook or Twitter. And once I get this show out there, I'll probably resume, getting back to social media. And I find myself, and it's not something I'm proud of, I find myself being somewhat hesitant or, worrying. I do this a lot, I think. And this is something I've actually been complimented on in the past regarding the show. I tend to offer or put forward this kind of devil's advocate point of view in opposition to my own argument, as if I'm trying to intellectually test the mettle or merit of my own argument. In a way, it's like I'm trying to focus in on or predict what counter-arguments or retorts, people on the other side of the argument might throw at me. And I think in part, I really am doing this because I value intellectual honesty and I'm trying to be fair and objective. But I think there's another reason why I do it too, because I'm self-conscious. I don't like criticism. So I will try to cut my critics off at the pass by voicing what I think their counter arguments or criticisms will be. You know what I mean? So I think there is a kind of a solid intellectual reason why I tend to try to voice the devil's advocate approach to my own take on things. But there's also that other like more personal, more kind of sensitive or self-conscious reason why I do it. And that like negative critic in my head was kind of saying, if you do an episode all about your dog dying, people are going to be saying things like, was this guy a pussy? Was it a grown man going on about losing a pet? And then I'm like, I really have to stop worrying about shit like this. This is my platform. I can use it how I want. And since, I have a relatively small following, and I think those like loyal listeners, and, some of my listenership, I consider friends now, the type that I've interacted with for, years now. And I think my loyal listener base likes it when I'm honest and I just express, kind of bare myself before the world and say what I'm really thinking and really feeling. And anyone else, who cares? Who cares? I mean, I might as well be true to myself and just nakedly express what I'm honestly thinking and feeling, And if someone would judge me for expressing too much emotion or whatever, or sentiment for a beloved pet passing, then they're probably not someone I'm interested in knowing or interacting with anyway, But I think most decent people possess a certain degree of empathy. And I think probably I would like to think that across party lines, whether you're an atheist, a believer, a Democrat, a Republican, I imagine most decent people understand or can relate to the sense of loss one feels when you do lose a beloved pet, especially a kind of relatively advanced mammal like a dog or a cat. And so, this is just going to be my honest kind of expression and exploration of my own thoughts and feelings in the wake of this loss. You know what I mean? And I was going to say that how, I'll often see people post things on social media about the loss of a beloved pet, about the loss of a family member, maybe a brother or sister, maybe a mother or father or grandparent. And my kind of automatic or gut response is that I feel for the person. And often, I'll want to reach out to them, and often I do, but sometimes I don't know if the person would, prefer some space. It can be kind of tricky to navigate. But I imagine if the person's posting about their loss, on social media, on Facebook or whatever, that might be a signal that's all right to, respond to the post and let them know how sorry you are and how your thoughts are with them, etc. But I don't know what it says about me, but I would also at the same time think to myself, if I was in their shoes, I don't know if I would post something like this on social media. Because to me, the loss would be so personal and I would have so much like a feeling of respect and duty to the memory of the person or animal that I lost, that I wouldn't want to seem like I was turning their loss or their memory into internet fodder or, or something like that, or as a vehicle for getting pity or sympathy or attention from, people on social media. And then I noticed, though, when I lost my pet, I think it's nice to say that, but when you're actually in the throes of loss and grief, I think there is a natural tendency to want to reach out to people and express what you're going through. So I did offer that quick mention of the passing of my dog on social media, I guess probably for two reasons. One was simply that I felt like I had a duty to my listeners and YouTube viewers to let them know why there wasn't going to be an episode that week and why I was about to disappear from social media. You know what I mean? And also, I have to try to be as honest as possible. I think it probably did allow like a certain kind of outlet for me. I got to express, even in that short tweet or that short post, I let people know I was going through something and I let them know what it was, even though if it was short. So that offered maybe this kind of little bit of, kind of release or catharsis. But I didn't post about it on my personal Facebook page because I was worried that maybe, it would be like I was making my dog's loss more about me than them. And I knew I'd probably have like 10, 20, 30 or whatever people, saying sorry for your loss, and which is nice. And I actually saw that some listeners and some listeners I interact with on Twitter, that some of them did offer me their condolences and, let me know that, I had their best wishes and their sympathy or whatever. And that did surprisingly make me feel good. And I imagine if I did post about this on my regular Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, I probably would have got a lot more of that. But for some reason, I felt a little conflicted. I think I was still so deep in the loss that it just would have seemed, I don't know what the word is, but it was my loss. It was personal. I was still at the peak, of it. And I don't know, maybe I still had some of that kind of feeling where I felt like I didn't want to turn my dog's loss into a vehicle for, sympathy and attention or something like that. I don't know. But to the many of you out there who have posted, about the loss of a loved one, whether it be a family member or a beloved pet. I'm totally with you, and I'm not judging you for that. And I think my take is probably the minority take. Most people do think it's all, and I think it's all right for other people to do it. Like many things in life, I tend to be harder on myself than I am on others. But I think it's perfectly fine, and I completely understand why when you've lost someone and you're grieving, why you'd want to reach out. I think that's the normal human reaction. And so, yeah, I mean, if you've been listening to the show for, any length of time or whatever, you've probably heard me mention my long-haired Chihuahua, Olive. And it's funny. Ever since, some people might say, why a Chihuahua? I know there's a lot of guys who maybe they think it's like an extension of their masculinity or something. There's the stereotype of the guy who wants to appear macho, so has the big, powerful dog, the pit bull or whatever. Well, ever since I was a kid, I think I was like a little kid, like Leave It to Beaver was way before my time, but there were still, black and white reruns on when I was a kid. And there was an episode of Leave It to Beaver, unless this is all some weird hallucination or dream, where Beaver, I feel self-conscious saying Beaver, where Beaver had a little Chihuahua. And he tucked it away in his coat. And I think, he didn't want his parents or something to find out that he had this little dog. He didn't want to be forced to have to give it up, And I think I was just amazed that, like, a dog that little actually existed. And for some reason, I thought it was really cool. So when I first moved away from home, and this was the first dog that was ever mine, my dog, not a family dog. I decided I wanted a dog, and I wanted to be a Chihuahua. And so I started, looking online, and I found a place in Massachusetts called Yankee Chihuahua Rescue, and they had all these available dogs, that were available for adoption. And I saw this one dog named Sparky, and his picture didn't really do him justice. He looked like kind of a little, maybe kind of an oddball, a misfit, which might make you think right away that'd be the dog for me. But, he looked a little off, but he was like one of the only dogs available. And so I arranged for one of the, I don't know what the word is, one of the volunteers or representatives of the charity to bring this dog to where I was living at the time. And the person comes, they have this little carrier, like a small carrier, and they open it up. And I could not believe how small this dog was. It was amazing. And had the cutest face. For some reason, it didn't come across through the photos on the website. But he had, for you who aren't initiated into, the Chihuahua elite or whatever, Chihuahuas have come with two types of heads. Not one Chihuahua with two heads like some kind of weird miniature Cerberus. Cerberus had three heads, right? But Greek mythology. But, a Chihuahua can be either what they call a deer head type or an apple head type. So a deer head type of Chihuahua is like the Taco Bell dog, where they have kind of a flat, elongated, pointy face like a deer. An apple head Chihuahua has more of a baby face. It has more of a compact muzzle, and they have a round dome-shaped head. And so this is what this dog was like. He was this tiny little fluffy dog, black, white, and brindle, which is somewhat kind of rare for a Chihuahua, and a rounded head with a little face. And so I just fell in love with this dog. I thought was the most awesome thing. And so 2 days later, they let me know not only was I approved, but I could come get the dog, which I did. And I changed his, I like, it was like torturous trying to find, you probably know, a lot of you out there probably know what's like struggling to find the perfect name for a new pet. Quite the kind of Herculean effort or whatever. And I I think at this time, this actually may have been before I went back to school for graphic design, but I had always been into art. And I think maybe recently I had been, I'd watched a documentary on Picasso, and I started getting into the work of Pablo Picasso. And all of a sudden, I thought Picasso. And it might seem pretentious to some, but it just seemed to fit that dog perfectly. It was like a cool, unique name, and it matched the dog, and it reflected like my interest in art. So the dog became Picasso. And Chihuahuas have a bad rap, but this was like the most laid back, quiet, and gentle dog, almost like a rag doll that you would ever encounter. And from the moment I picked him up, when I went to the foster place and got him, he insisted on being in my lap. And there goes that annoying little pop from my computer, when it starts to warm up. Anyway, I'm not editing that out. So, it was really weird how he bonded with me, like right off the bat. And I like stopped by my parents' place to introduce the dog to them. And he just kept on coming back over to me, didn't want to leave my side. And for a long time, if I even left to go out to my car for a second, or if I took him with me and I, closed the door behind me so he couldn't get out, and, I'd pump gas or something, that's the only time a noise would come out of him. And it would be like this desperate, high-pitched yipping, like, please don't leave me alone, And so I got super attached to that dog. And very similar to the Chihuahua I just lost, once he got around those senior years, like 9 or 10 years old, and one of the reasons why I like little dogs is they claim that they're long-lived, like a Chihuahua, or like I had a Yorkshire Terrier growing up, which lived to be like 19 or 20. It was crazy. But Chihuahuas are known for how long-lived they can be. And my last 2 Chihuahuas have both died when they were just really getting into those advanced years. The dog that just passed away was roughly 11, and that was roughly the same age as Picasso. And he developed like lung problems, heart problems. He was on like a Nalopril. He was on Theophylline, which I used to be on. It's like an old school asthma drug. And it's uncanny how, like, I remember when I was a kid, I used to say how I thought it was awful that people had dogs euthanized, because I love dogs so much. And I thought, we don't do that to people. People get a say in whether, they want to, be euthanized or stay alive or whatever. The dog can't even decide, and we kill it just because it's sick. People get sick all the time. We don't, just euthanize them or whatever, And I obviously have a totally different take now, where I think it is uncanny how a dog will kind of let you know. You just feel it in your bones when the dog has reached the end of the road. That dog is just suffering. It can no longer function. And you realize, out of love for the dog, you have to do something. But I don't know why I'm bringing this up now, because actually Picasso wasn't euthanized. But that morning, where I actually had to have a family member drive me, and I rushed through, we were trying to get through a bad New England snowstorm to the vet. And I was holding him on my lap, and I knew something was wrong, because, like, he already had, like, a cough and stuff because he had heart and lung trouble. But his posture was different. It looked like he was holding his head up, like, struggling for air suddenly. And he was such a nice, mellow dog, but he was making, like, this almost angry honking noise, like he was really in bad shape, And he died in my lap on the way to the vet. But my guess is if he had survived the ride, they probably would have told me the best thing would have been to euthanize him. And that dog I grew up with, that Yorkie, who ended up being like 19 or 20 years old, I actually ended up taking him to the vet for my parents to be euthanized. Just one more, this dog just kept on ticking, and he was kind of scary near the end. Like the last few years, he was losing a lot of hair, losing teeth, cataracts, just a nasty smell coming off of him, but I would still hold him and I'd shampoo him and all that stuff. But one day he couldn't get out of his bed and he was making a horrible honking noise. It's like the dogs really do let you know when they're just in agony and can't go on anymore. And it's funny. So I got Olive to help me get over the loss of Picasso. And you can never fully get over the loss of a dog. And I think the idea of trying to replace a dog is obscene. You know what I mean? And I think most people, that's not, in fairness, that's not their intent. You're not trying to replace the dog, but you feel such acute loss, such despair, and you feel their absence so deeply that you hope that maybe by caring for another animal, it might ease some of the pain or make it easier to move through that acute loss. You know what I mean? So like, I still think of Picasso, but it's like positive in a way. Like I remember him in this nice, warm, sentimental way. Only rarely will I really be hit with the horrible thoughts about his last hours or whatever. Usually it's just like when you lose a human family member. After what, I think part of it is just the nature of memory. Human memory isn't perfect. And I think as day after day goes by, just due to the nature of human memory, you start to you roughly remember like the good things and you carry that with you. But the sharp, nagging memory of the agony the animal was in at the end starts to fade, where it can be at least be bearable to kind of try to put one foot in front of the other and just focus on the positive. You know what I mean? I don't know if any of that makes any sense. But with the passage of time, it gets easier to go on. And so I got Olive to help me deal with the loss of Picasso. And I remember bringing home Olive, and she was like a super cute puppy, man. It was ridiculous. And still, it was my idea to get her, and I'm the one who, paid for her, brought her home and everything. I was like, still there was a part of me that was like, she's not Picasso. You know what I mean? And a little bit of this dog can't measure up to Picasso. He was the greatest dog ever, And now I'm in that same place. It's come kind of full circle where I feel like Olive was the greatest dog ever. And I have been looking, and it might see, hopefully it doesn't seem like untoward or, this. Part of the grieving process. I've already started looking at classifieds and stuff and trying to get in touch with breeders, because the loss I feel is just so horrible. And every day, like, I might think I catch the glimpse of like a bushy tail moving through the next room out of the corner of my eye. Or I'll be eating something and I'll want to turn around to give her a little piece and she's not there. Or I go to check on her in her bed and the bed is eerily empty. You know what I mean? And so I feel like I can't replace her, but if I go and get another puppy or whatever, it will help me deal with the loss, and it might let some kind of metaphorical sun in, you know what I mean? So yeah, I remember I had a lot of trouble finding a name for Olive too. But I can't even remember, to be honest, but there's a chance it may have been partially influenced by that Drew Barrymore animated Christmas special, All of the Other Reindeer, which was about a dog who wants to be a reindeer. And she actually had the same colors as my dog. Or it could have been just a name I eventually landed on that kind of had a nice ring to it, and seemed to fit her. And it really did fit her. And I found out after the fact that my father had an aunt named Olive who I didn't know about. So that was kind of a weird coincidence. Yeah, she was, it's weird because I used to think that Picasso was he was the most gentle dog I had ever encountered. But each dog has their own personality. And Olive had like a personality that I really almost like respected or admired. It was weird. She was complex. Like she was a very gentle and affectionate dog who loved people, but she was also like strong-willed. And if she wasn't in the mood for something, she'd let you know. Like if she was sleeping and you decide you wanted to take her out to go to the bathroom, she might give you like look back at you and snarl a little, like, okay, I get it, I'll back off a little, you know what I mean? Or something like that. Or if you tried to give her a pill and she wasn't in the mood, she wouldn't bite you, but she'd lift up the lip to let you know to back off or whatever, Or if she really wanted something, it was kind of like cute but obnoxious. Like she would stand up on two legs, put one leg on the table, and bang, like literally bang with her other paw, with her nails on the table to let you know, on the glass table to let you know she wanted treats that were on the table. Or if she wanted food, sometimes she would just look at you and bark, like a demanding bark. But at the same time, she loved to be picked up. She loved to be like petted. She loved to like come in the bed at night and she would like curl up on my chest. And while I'm trying to fall asleep, she'd be nudging my fingers with her nose to let me know she wanted her head petted or pet or whatever. So it was really wild. And she would actually she barked more when people tried to leave than when they came in because she liked people so much and she didn't like seeing them leave. It was weird. But just like a super cool dog with a really kind of complex but fun personality. And so when she got to be like, I can't believe how time flies. I can literally remember bringing her home. And now it's like, she was 11 years old. I got her when she was 11 or almost 11 when she passed. And I got her when she was 10 weeks old. And I cannot believe like a decade or more has transpired that quickly. And when she was around, I would say 9 going on 10, she started to develop this cough out of nowhere. And I knew she had a heart murmur when she was just a little puppy, like her first or second vet appointment. The vet says she has a small heart murmur. It's something we're going to have to keep our eyes on. And I can always remember almost it seemed like every day or whatever, I'd be trying to think about her age and wanting time to slow because I know how short dogs' lifespans are compared to ours, even a long-lived breed like a Chihuahua. And since my last Chihuahua didn't, only live to be like, I don't know what his actual age was. They were guessing he was 1 to 2 years old when I adopted him. And I think I had him for roughly like 9 or 10 years when he passed. But I would have hoped he would live as long as the little Yorkshire Terrier I grew up with. So I was nervous that she might start getting sick around 10 or something. So I wanted her to age as slowly as possible. And it was kind of sad, when another year would go by. And so when she was like 9 going on 10, she started to develop a cough. And the vet she had her whole life said, he like seriously put down his stethoscope and said, it's time. It's time to have her heart looked at. And so I had to take her to a veterinary cardiologist. And they gave her an ultrasound to look at her heart. And, I'm someone that has to, I just scrape by. I have to work to make ends meet. And the ultrasound alone, I think, ended up being like 600 and something. And he goes to me, the cardiologist, I think it's best that we also take some x-rays. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And I'm like, more money. But I'm like, just hoping this guy isn't trying to pad the bill and he's actually an ethical doctor. And I'm like, if she needs it, do it. Let's do it. And so he gave her X-ray. He had her X-rayed too. And I think the bill ended up going over $1,000 or whatever. But hey, I mean, what mattered to me is that she gets the treatment and she stays alive. And he talked to me with I don't know. It seemed like at the minimum 20 minutes, maybe 40 minutes going over all the stuff. And he said that it didn't look like severe congestive heart failure. It looked like, but she would probably get there at some point. But for the time being, he said it's a little dog with an enlarged heart and some breathing issues. And so he put her on sildenafil, yes, Viagra. And I'm like, what? But turns out Viagra was originally a heart medicine, because the way it works as a boner pill is it dilates or opens up blood vessels to allow more blood to go through your system. And so that's what it does for people and dogs with heart trouble. And then they also prescribe this special heart medicine that's pretty pricey called, the brand name is VetMedin. The generic name is Pimobendin, I think. Kind of a funny name. And so she was on that too. And so I'm like, I felt pretty good. I'm like, oh, so it sounds like her ticker is not that bad. You know what I mean? And yeah, so he was supposed to forward all of her information to her primary vet. And I noticed in the notes, it said something about a distended belly. He noted it being, quote unquote, abnormal, but free from pain and, quote unquote, any kind of fluid wave, meaning he didn't detect fluid in it. And that would kind of come back to haunt me or us or whatever, me and her. Because it's funny, I was giving her I had her on a special dog food diet so she would lose weight. And the weird thing was she was losing weight, but her belly was getting bigger. She had this distended belly. And so leading up to all this, to, recent events, I had tried to get in touch with her primary vet. I think he wasn't in. So the girl behind the desk or the person answering the phone said I should go to the animal hospital where the cardiologist is located and bring my concerns to them. They never answered. This was around the beginning of all this coronavirus stuff. So I got in touch with her primary vet finally. And I'm like, she's acting a little weird. Her cough is getting worse. I'm wondering if it's time to add enalapril, another heart medicine, to her regimen or whatever. And he was like, well, and I also mentioned the distended belly. And he said, well, it's probably not a big deal. We probably don't need to add enalapril at this time. I saw in her notes that the doctor said she wasn't really, quote unquote, in congestive heart failure territory. You know, she was on the edge of it, and that I asked about maybe she needs some kind of medicine for her lungs too. And he said, and this is someone I thought for the most part is usually a really good and ethical and caring vet. He didn't want to add any medicines. And then the next day she started acting really weird. Like her cough went from getting worse to her being like eerily quiet. I'm like, something's not right. It doesn't make sense for a dog with a chronic cough for the cough to suddenly completely disappear, but you can tell something's off with her. It's not like she was suddenly miraculously healed or something, or like she had a milk bone in her throat for 2 years and finally coughed it up. You know, I knew something wasn't right. So I called him again because that day, I noticed that she was standing up, she was like sitting up with her neck, just like when my dog Picasso, the last day of his life, sitting with her neck raised up and almost like falling asleep in place in a sitting position. And she never does that. She never does. Remember the doozers from Fraggle Rock? She never closed her eyes like that. Only occasionally would you see her fighting to stay awake, and it was when she was in a normal resting position. And she was acting like off, like she was unsure of herself, like she couldn't get up steps by herself, like she would tentatively practice like she was going to go up a step when she could effortlessly leap over things and stuff. It was very kind of weird and unsettling. And then so I picked her up just to like comfort her and hold her. And all of a sudden she let out like a screeching sound and her limbs went limp and her head like craned backwards and she just flopped like a rag doll. And I put her on the floor and her legs just went splayed out under her. And so I'm rubbing her and, you know, trying to, I don't know what, you know, rubbing her fur, trying to stimulate her back to consciousness, you know, calling her name and stuff. And suddenly she came through. And I'm like, holy crap. Because here we are in the midst of coronavirus. And I thought I was going to have to bury my dog in the backyard, you know. And if I was going to be where I am for the rest of my life, I probably wouldn't mind having my dog in the backyard. It'd actually be comforting. But I hate the idea of like burying your dog in the backyard and knowing that you'll probably move at some point and you have to leave their remains behind. I just don't like that. And so I called up the vet, and when I said she had craned her head back, he said that's symptomatic of a seizure. And it was weird, like the vet seemed kind of like almost irked or irritable. Not like he's usually a really laid back guy. And he seemed to be kind of grumbling about because of COVID-19, they couldn't even have owners, or I don't even know if they were having animals in their building. And so I said, like, well, what could this, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That's a seizure. I mean, it very well could be a seizure, but that would be pretty alarming because she's a senior dog and she's never had a seizure in her life. And so I asked him, I'm like, what could cause a 10 or 11-year-old dog to suddenly have a seizure when they have no history of it? And he's saying, I don't know. And he rattled off a few things, and among them was a tumor, possibly in the brain. And I'm like, that's not comforting, you know? And he said his advice to me was to start a journal, a medical journal, and just start noting down the duration and the time in between seizures and the characteristics of the seizure or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do that, you know? And then the next day, she was even worse. I could see that they tell you when you have a dog with heart or breathing problems that you're supposed to monitor their breathing. And the way you do that is like you get a stopwatch and you either look at them or put your hand on them and you time how often they're breathing within a minute, how many, you know, inhales and exhales they have per minute. And I think like a healthy dog is supposed to be maybe somewhere in between the high teens to the high 20s or something like that. Anything over like 30, and you should start to be worried. And she was breathing once per second. It was not good. And she just seemed confused and out of it. And I'm like, I'm taking her to the animal hospital. So I called up the emergency clinic where she had her like cardiac appointment and all that. And they said, yeah, they're still seeing dogs, but owners can't come in. And, it's almost like you pull up and there's an attendant in like a booth, and you talk to the attendant and let them know you're there, and someone comes out and gets your dog. So I did that, and it was weird. On that last ride to the vet, she started acting like herself again. I think maybe her adrenaline was pumping because of the excitement of being in the car and not knowing what's going on. And she was funny. Actually, my other Chihuahua used to do this too, Picasso. Whenever I would drive, they would insist on being in my lap. And if I tried to move them, they'd get right back in my lap. And both of them would like put their arms, or front legs on my forearm, my left forearm while I drove. And they would look out the window. And I'd always keep the window up enough so they couldn't fit through. I'm kind of like an overly doting or concerned pet parent or whatever. Even though most likely a dog is smart enough to know not to jump out the window, I didn't want to take any chance. So if I opened the window at all, it'd be like 2 inches, And it would you'd feel this weird kind of you'd be driving, trying to turn the wheel, and you could feel the pressure against your arm because this little dog's paws and legs are pushing down against you. And they'd stare out trying to take it all in, And so she did that. And so I parked the car to the side, and a nurse or whatever came out with a mask and gloves on, and I also had a mask and gloves on. I was using one of the masks I would use at work, doing construction. And I kind of said, half jokingly, I'm like, don't worry about the mask. I'm fine, just a precaution. And she's like, says the same thing back. And so she takes the dog in, and I'm just in my car in the parking lot. And I don't know what I expected. I was concerned, but not too concerned. I think I was aware that something major could be going on. But at the same time, I think I also thought, or maybe it was just hope, that whatever it is, maybe it could be fixed with more medicine. And I'll be leaving here today with my dog, So for like 20 minutes, I'm just kind of looking at social media, trying to get started on an episode script. And I was going to do a script that week. I was going to do an episode that week. And it was going to be one of my little scripted documentary episodes. And it did have to do with animals, but don't worry. It wasn't like a vegan documentary or a vegan or an animal rights episode. It had to do with animals, but it was about this really kind of weird, bizarre thing from like medieval history. This kind of like folksy belief about plants and animals. And I don't want to give too much away because I'm going to end up still doing an episode on it. So don't worry. For those of you who are worried that I might be sneaking vegan content into the Week in Doubt, which is, of course, a podcast for atheists, agnostics, and whoever. Just had to think for a minute about my own tagline. It was just going to be one of those weird history kind of things. But since it did kind of have to do with animals, I was in no place to be talking about animals because I'd be thinking about her, and I wouldn't be able to do it, And so like maybe 20 minutes into sitting in the parking lot, or it could have been more, I don't know, the doctor calls me on my cell phone, like she was calling for me across the parking lot through I don't know, we were talking through soup cans and a string. No, she called me on my cell phone, and she was saying that she won my permission to do some tests. And I said to her that the thing that concerned me was her abdomen. I said, she's actually been losing weight, but her abdomen is bigger. And I said, that does not bode well for me. And it seemed to me that maybe she was retaining fluid. And the doctor, the vet, was like, wow, you're pretty much saying what I was going to say to you or whatever. And she wanted my permission to do an ultrasound and x-rays. And I knew this was going to cost like another $1,000 or more. I didn't care. I'm like, do whatever you have to do to find out what's going on. And so while I'm waiting for the next phone call, I'm literally applying for a credit limit increase for my Care Credit account. If you're not familiar with Care Credit, it's like a credit card, but that you can only use for medical reasons, but it includes dental and vet stuff. And so it's very convenient and handy that way. But what sucks about it, if you don't pay off what you owe within a relatively short window of time, I don't know if it's 3 months, 6 months, whatever, you get hit with a super high interest rate. So it's kind of parasitic and, or like most credit cards and crap like that, But luckily, I was able to double my credit line right away. I mean, they're probably, oh, sure, you want a higher credit? Sure, man, let's get you further into debt, And so I get the next call. And I'm kind of pissed that this vet had a really nice bedside manner. But I don't know. I'm in the parking lot, the dog's inside, but figure of speech, bedside manner. And I'm kind of pissed though in retrospect because she started off in a way that made me very hopeful. She goes, so we took the x-rays, we did the ultrasound, and her heart and her lungs actually don't look that bad. It looks like things haven't gotten any worse since her last visit. And I'm like thinking to myself, holy shit, this is awesome. I'm like, oh, thanks. That's really good, And then she gets the other shoe drops and she gets the bad news. And she's saying like, you were right to be concerned with her swollen stomach or whatever. She says it looks like she has a big tumor and it ruptured. And I'm like, holy shit, you know what I mean? And so I'm trying to figure out what it means. I'm like, can we cut it out? What do we do? And so it's like she went on to tell me that the reason why she's probably having so much trouble is because it's gross, man. Like I almost want to be mad at the tumor, but the tumor is just, we know what cancers and tumors are. I think there are things about modern life, like our diets, probably pollution, chemicals that we're exposed to, that I think can probably even drastically increase our chances of developing certain types of cancer. But I always thought, just given the nature of cancer, that cancer is probably just about as old as multicellular organisms, multicellular life itself, because all cancer is it's cells that have run amok, you know what I mean? And as multicellular beings, our bodies are constantly duplicating, new cells. So it's almost, in some ways, you could say it's surprising that cancer doesn't develop more, given the nature of being multicellular beings and what can go wrong with that, regeneration or duplication, replication process, whatever. So I'm almost still find myself pissed off at the tumor, even though it's just an organic growth on the dog who I love's, or in the dog who I love's body. And they're vampiric or parasitic. Tumors will actually feed off of your dog's or your blood supply to feed the growth. You know what I mean? To feed itself. And so what happened was, this tumor reached the part where it ruptured. And so she had all sorts of internal bleeding. And on top of it, her blood count was down because this thing had been leaching blood from her. And more blood may have been lost from the hemorrhaging, the internal bleeding. So they were saying that she would need like a splenectomy, and she would need blood transfusions and everything else. And so I'm like, if she has a splenectomy, what's that going to cost? How much time will it buy her? I mean, because I was thinking, as long as it was humanly possible for me to scrape up the money or get it via credit, I was going to do it to keep her alive, you know? And so she told me, and I found this out for myself. It was what she said was kind of verified by my own research online, that splenic tumors are one of the most common types of tumors or cancer in dogs. But for some reason, it usually occurs in bigger breeds like Labradors and Retrievers and stuff. But it makes me wonder if did Picasso go through the same thing? Because the day he died, he was showing the same kind of symptoms or behavior. And they told me at the vets that, I gave him to them wrapped up in a blanket, and they confirmed my worst fears that, yeah, he was dead. And it probably had something to do with his stomach or maybe the lungs and heart, which that's a possibility too, that his belly was probably full of and distended with fluid. And here my Apple Watch died, and it usually unlocks my computer for me. My computer just fell asleep. So sorry about this, guys. When I say guys, I mean male and female listeners. Guy. I call everyone guy. But guy, dude, whatever. But I think it's common to refer to even female friends as guys. But, hey guys, what do you want to do? Why'd this suddenly become like a PC social issue thing? I don't know. But now I gotta type in my password and get the computer to open up so I can continue recording. So, I guess it's a common type of cancer with senior dogs, with older dogs, usually dogs from 9 or 10 years up. And I guess there's something called the 2/3 rule, where vets basically expect that, 2 out of 3 dogs who have this kind of tumor, it's going to be malignant. And by the time you find it, it's already spread to other parts of the body. And so she told me that she also had enlarged or swollen lymph nodes and her adrenal gland or thyroid or something. So other glands and organs or whatever were also unusually kind of large and swollen, which would seem to indicate that the cancer had spread throughout the body. And she was saying sometimes a bigger tumor can be a good sign in a weird way, even though it sounds counterintuitive. It can signal that the tumor must have been there a while without killing the animal. So there's a bigger chance it might be benign. But then she's still telling me it looks like it could be malignant because it looks like it's spread to other parts of the body. And she said if you did want to try the surgery and it's malignant, you'll be lucky to get 2 to 3 months out of her. And she'll probably still be in pain, and the cancer will be will be wreaking havoc in other parts of the body, and she'll eventually die on her own, or you'll have to bring her back here to be euthanized. And I'm like, okay, in case I want to go against all the odds and do everything I can to save her, even if I only get a couple of months out of her, I say, how much is all this going to cost? I said if I can afford it, I'll pay it. Even if I have to go further into debt. And she tells me we're looking at least $5,000. And in retrospect, I mean, after the fact, I went online and I saw splenectomies being quoted from anywhere from 1,000 to over 5,000. And I guess in part it depends where on the map you are. Maybe it's kind of like rent or housing costs. I don't know. Maybe veterinary costs are higher, and here in the Northeast, I don't know. But yeah, so she said 5,000, and I said that's more than even considering the doubling of the credit line I got while I was waiting in the car. That the credit I have isn't enough to cover that. I sure as hell don't have 5,000 in the bank. In fact, I've been laid off because of the coronavirus for 3 weeks now, and I just received the first unemployment check, and they were supposed to do a thing where if you were affected by coronavirus, and I let them know that when I was filing for unemployment, I said, temporarily laid off because of everyone's been non-essential workers have been ordered to stay home, and I ain't got a job that you do from your house. I have to be at a physical location swinging a hammer, yeah. So it's getting kind of scary. I've already had to try to get in touch with creditors and let them know. Because supposedly creditors have been trying to spin a thing like, to try to come off as kind of warm and fuzzy, the kinder, gentler creditor, that we're willing to work with our customers and possibly, defer payments because we understand what you're going through. And I know, so you go to some creditors and try to get that done, and they're like, oh, just call us and we can help you defer a payment. But we have to warn you that call times are greatly increased. And they're saying because of their workers, the safety of their workers, they're keeping their employees at home for understandably for safety reasons because of the coronavirus. And I'm thinking, if there was ever a job you could fucking do from home, wouldn't it be being a telemarketer or whatever it is, a phone person, a phone representative for a credit card company? Wouldn't that be like the ideal job to do from home? All you're doing is talking. And sorry for all the F-bombs. I'm letting it all out. You know what I mean? So that seemed weird to me. And all I can imagine is, because obviously we all know the ongoing joke, because there's truth in it, that if you're here in the West talking to, a phone rep for a credit card company or whatever it is, they're most likely on the other side of the world. They're most likely in India, usually, And I always thought very weird that, I don't know who is encouraging to do this, if it's the big bank companies themselves or if it's whoever they answer to over in India, but it'll clearly be someone with a thick Indian accent, and they'll try to tell you their name is like Brad or Dave. I'm like, really? It's like, I'm not racist. I am very, since I was a teenager, I've been interested in Indian culture, Eastern culture, in Hinduism, and in Eastern philosophy. And I'm like, I am with you, my Indian brothers and sisters. You can tell me your real name. So you're talking to someone with a really thick Indian accent. Like, this is Dave. How may I help? I'm like, really? But anyway, so I'm wondering if all these people who I'm sure are grossly underpaid, they probably have them reporting to some kind of telemarketer center or something, I'm like, but can't they, if that's the case, can't these big businesses afford to send like phone, like some kind of, cell phones or a computer and like I don't know, some kind of microphone gear to these people so they can still do their job but do it safely from home. It doesn't make sense to me that like for safety reasons you need phone receptionists or assistants to stay at home due to the coronavirus. I don't get it. I don't get it. But these are crazy times. And so anyway, how the hell did I get on this topic? I have no idea. I have no idea how I got on this. I don't know if that's my amitriptyline fog or whatever. But so anyway, yeah, I probably got onto this. Oh yeah, I know. I was talking about the cost of having vet procedures done, and I was talking about, you know, if I had to put myself even deeper in debt to keep my dog alive, who means more than anything to me, I would have done it. But they said over 5,000. Didn't have that in my bank account. I don't have that in available credit. I'm not gonna, take a top hat and magically have a rabbit shit it out for me or something, So they're telling me basically that even if we did do all these even if we did perform this costly surgery, and on top of it there would be an expensive series of blood transfusions, this and that, possibly chemotherapy if she survived the splenectomy and everything else, And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, I can't afford that. You know what I mean? And she's being very sympathetic. She's like, I know. And she told me how, and this actually, I found this comforting. She told me she loves chihuahuas and her dog at home is a long-haired chihuahua. And she said when she picked up like the clipboard or whatever, for the patient, she read long-haired chihuahua and she was like, this is the patient for me, So that, I found that touching and that comforted me to some degree. And so she said, oh, I know this is hard. And she was kind of nudging, me towards the direction that she brought it up first. She's like, we have to decide if the right thing for her is to have her euthanized today. And she said that, now I'm starting to get emotional. What was it she said? There I am drawing a blank again. Yeah, she seemed to be nudging me in that direction, that the best thing to do for her would be probably to put her down, and that even if I had gone ahead with the surgery, if somehow magically I managed to procure the money, that there was still a good chance that she may only live like 2 or 3 months, and they might not be the greatest quality of months, Because that was scary, man, because like that last night I had her, I was afraid to pick her up because I didn't want her to collapse again. But I felt so bad for her that I decided that I want her to at least have the comfort of being in bed with me, which is what she prefers. So I gently pick her up in a way where I'm not putting any pressure on her abdomen. And it was like crazy, man, because the first time I live on like right at a corner, like an intersection where 2 back streets meet. And sometimes during the night, you'll hear like the really loud noise of someone driving too quickly and putting on their brakes as they make the turn. And sometimes there's cats either fighting or mating, making like these god-awful screeching noises, as they tend to do. Don't worry, I had a cat as a child, and I love cats. The only reason why I don't have a cat is allergies. I'm not saying all cats make this. Here I am doing that thing again, where I foresee people criticizing me, so I try to beat them, cut them off at the pass. Did I almost say beat them off? Oh, what? Unscripted. But I have a sad story about how I lost my cat, too. Cat named Snowball. I was just a little kid. And I remember even as a cat, here I go on a digress. Even as a cat, in my former life, said the atheist, in my former life as a cat, I remember even as a kid, I felt so much for this cat and wanted to protect it. And I was like an elementary school kid. One day, my parents thought it was the right thing to do because back in that day, people let their dogs roam around without, being on a leash. People let their cats wander the neighborhood. My parents were trying to teach my cat to go outside. And the cat was like, almost like Sylvester, in like a Warner Brothers cartoon or whatever, had all his claws out and was clinging to the screen with all four claws. And I remember feeling bad, like, and saying, Mom or whatever, I don't think that the cat wants to go out, But finally, the cat got acclimated to it and actually enjoyed being out. And one day, the cat just never came home. And we used to have this theory that there was a lady who lived across from us. And she was like a cat lady who used to have all sorts of cats. And she used to feed our cat, and she would like accuse us of not feeding our cat. And our cat was spoiled, and he would eat all the time. Besides cat food, my parents used to bring him home like meat on bones from whatever restaurant they were at or whatever, especially for the cat. So, but of course, animals love to eat. Well, we're animals. We love to eat. You ever do that thing where you almost criticize your pet for constantly wanting food, but then you think like, wait, I'm constantly opening the refrigerator because I feel hungry and I have to fight to not, eat more than I should. We're like them, And we had this theory that this woman who's to try to chide us for not feeding the cat enough when the cat was constantly eating, that she was connected to a rescue place in New Hampshire where she would often bring cats she found. And our cat went missing right around the time when she made one of those trips. So we never knew for certain, but we had this theory, or this idea, this notion that this neighbor may have taken our cat and given it away, which in a weird way I might prefer, because the other awful scenario is that maybe the cat got hit by a car and wasn't, ended up meeting some horrible, violent fate. You know what I mean? I guess all things being considered, it would be better if you care about the cat that maybe it got taken to a rescue place, even though you were a loving owner, and then ended up going to another loving family. That's better than thinking that got hit by a car, killed by some sadistic adolescent, or I don't know, or just got lost and died in the wild, But back to Olive, my Chihuahua, and so around this time, it seemed to be the lady was kind of agreeing the conclusion of the conversation seemed to be wrapping up with the conclusion that the best thing to do, as sad as it is, would be to euthanize. Oh, I know what I was talking about, why I went off on cats. So that night, and this is what prompted me to bring her into my bed. I thought I was hearing either a loud noise of someone slamming on their brakes going around the corner, or cats fighting, or there's another F word, cats fighting or mating. But I'm like, it sounds a little different. And my kind of parental or pet owner instincts were like, you have to go to her. So I go to the other room to where one of her beds is that she likes being in. And she's looking up at me. And I couldn't, I couldn't discern definitively whether it was her making the noise or not, but I was afraid it was. So I took her in the bed with me. And also I wake up in the middle of the night and she's making that noise, that horrible screeching noise not next to me, this crying, screeching. Now, this is a thing I noticed. Like I was talking about how dogs almost let you know when it's time. This is the third dog I've had who, when they were at the end, started making like eerie, disturbing noises that they usually would not make. You know what I mean? That stop you in your tracks, and like, they've never made that noise. And that is a horrible noise to bear witness to. This is an animal that is in, I almost swore again. That's an effing agony, And so I'm like, holy shit. And so this was the middle of the night. And so I put my hand on her, both to comfort her and to monitor her breathing. And she had like a puddle of her jaws were kind of opening, and she had a puddle of saliva underneath her on the bed. And so I tried to contact the place, the emergency place. I was having trouble getting through. So I'm like, all right, I'll just go back to bed and I'll just kind of keep my hand on her through the night. And she started acting like herself again for a bit. She like climbed up on my chest, nudged my fingers with her snout and stuff. So I woke up and she wasn't screeching or making awful noises. And she was even, walking around acting something like herself. But then I noticed her starting to looked like she was struggling. Like something was off, either with, her breathing or something. So that's when I'm like, no, she's got to go. She's got to go to this veterinary hospital. And luckily I was able to get through to someone. Yeah, so even, like I said, even the vet place, it's like they're somewhat understaffed. Humans, other than the staff, weren't allowed to come in. So even, with the veterinary field or whatever, you can see the toll that this whole COVID-19 coronavirus thing is taking. Yeah, so that is fucking, I'm gonna swear, that was fucking awful, man. And it was awful. It's so weird. It got me thinking about theodicy and, all the suffering in the world and trying to reconcile that with the idea of a good and just God or creator. And pets are so innocent and childlike. And here's this little chihuahua with just like these big innocent eyes, this baby like, dome head and this fluffy fur, these little tiny paws. And it's looking at you out of the side of its eye like it's wondering why it's in pain. And you can't let it know. You can't other than gently petting it and looking it back, lovingly looking it in the eye and trying to quiet it and soothe its pain. It doesn't know what's going on. And here's like this animal that's like the embodiment of innocence. And it's racked with pain and suffering. And it doesn't, I'm almost gonna cry, man. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Yeah, I am. I'm kind of on the verge of tears. I'll try not to go there. Because as I continue with the story, when the lady started to, nudge me towards euthanasia and I started to agree, I said to her, I can't believe how kind of even keeled I'm being and how calm I am. I seem to be, I think I'm just in a mode where I have to just, for her sake, function or whatever, And I'm almost kind of like low key bragging about how in control I am. And as I'm saying that, I start blubbering. And I'm just like, I think the last time I really cried was when my last dog died. I mean, I was just blubbering, coming apart. Like when you're crying as a kid or whatever and trying to talk to your parents or whoever, and you can barely form words because you're so choked up. And it almost becomes physically uncomfortable because you can feel your muscles in your face and in your neck involuntarily straining, and it's affecting your speech, and your face feels a mess with hot tears, And so I have to continue the conversation to give her and someone else that gets on the phone permission to euthanize my dog. And I'm trying to keep from crying now. And I just feel like this jelly of raw emotion. And they ask me at that point, they tell me, we are letting people in for euthanasias. Is that the right plural? Or euthanizations? I don't know. And they're like, you can come in if you want to say goodbye. And so I didn't mention that they said the reason why she was breathing so much was probably not because they said her lungs and heart hadn't gotten any worse. It was probably because she was in so much pain. And that like broke me, man. And they had to give her fentanyl. And here in New England, we're really one of the kind of epicenters of the opioid crisis. And so in the news all the time, we hear fentanyl mentioned because fentanyl is a prescription opioid that is, I think, is potentially I think it's more powerful than Oxycontin or Codeine or whatever. And it plays a big part in this whole opioid. And here my computer went to sleep again. And so when they told me my dog was in so much pain or discomfort that she had to be given fentanyl, I was like, oh man, And so here I was in my car, and the entrance to the place is far away, but I can see it. And I know I'm going to have to ask to be let in. I know I'm going to have to talk to people. And I contemplated going in there to be with her out of respect for her during her final moment. But I really felt like I couldn't function. I was a mess of just hot tears, and I was blubbering. And I felt like even like my diaphragm and everything was like heaving and jerking. Like I was just a mess. And I felt like if I tried to get to the entrance, I don't even know how well my legs would carry me. And I knew from past experience how quickly a dog goes once they're given the injection. It is like instantaneous. They just go limp. It is unbelievable. Because when I had to have my parents' dog brought to be put down, I at least had the solace that this dog was operating on a long time, on like borrowed time. It was really adept at evading the Reaper. This dog was 19 or 20. It had seen like almost 2 lifetimes for what's the average. The average dog maybe lives to be like in between 9 and 11 years. Not counting for breed specific, longevity or whatever. And so I was sad. And I think, I remember my father joking, my father loved that dog, and so did my mother, the Yorkie. But I can remember my father half jokingly, because this is around the time I'd first started working for the family construction business. We're out in the sun swinging hammers or whatever. And he goes, he's like, so Mr. Phillip, how you doing with the loss of Uncle Nick? Or that's the way my father talks. And he's kind of, half jokingly trying to like comedically broach the subject or whatever. And I just go, with my character, when I'm around my family, I can be kind of closed up or closed off. With my characteristic, like screwed up frown, I'm like, not very well. You know what I mean? Almost like a kid. I do kind of revert back to like a kid when I kind of regress when I'm around family. And my father kind of jokingly laughed and then tried to console me, and he really missed the dog too. In fact, my father cared so much about the dog that he gave me permission to bring it to the vet if things went south, But my father cared about that dog so much that he raced home. So maybe this was right. Yeah, no. So I think for some reason I was home, but my father was at the job. But the day after, we were working together. So this must have been, right where I started working for my parents. But for some reason, and it happens sometimes, I wasn't needed at the job where my father was needed at the moment. And my father raced home without telling me. And the vet, it was right after the vet put the dog down that my father, he came in just a second or a minute too late. And he's just kind of sadly looking at the dog and running his hand over the dog's body, But I remember the vet we were using at the time was this big, tall, older guy, kind of not that it matters, but just to be descriptive, like male horseshoe pattern baldness or whatever. It's like, got a giant older guy. And he was holding the dog, and he said to me, he's like, watch, like he thought it's something I should take note of. And he gives the dog the injection, and almost like a boa or like, a mink stole or something, he gives the dog the shot, and almost instantly, the dog, and this was a little Yorkshire Terrier, is draped over his arms like some kind of slinky boa or something. Completely lax, completely out, like devoid of life. And then he laid it on the bed or whatever, at this specific vet. Did I say Pacific or specific vet? Maybe it was a metal table like most vets have, but I almost remember it being kind of padded, like the type of table they'd have at a human doctor's office for the patient, Either way, he laid it down on the table or bed, and my father comes in and gently runs his hand over the dog and kind of silently, without words, says a goodbye, And I remember I did have some solace, even though that got to me. And actually, I had Picasso then, so I guess maybe in a way, I had some solace in the fact that I knew I had my dog, so there wasn't a complete void, And that might sound kind of cold in a weird way, but as I was grieving for the loss of this dog I grew up with, at least I did have the comfort of interacting with my dog, So I took that, I think like I said too, knowing that dog lived a very full life and that it's very rare for a dog to make it to like 19 or 20. I think I almost said the Italian dog. What the hell is wrong with me? I think I said it's after 1 a.m, so maybe I'm a little sleep deprived. I think the oldest dog in recorded history was like 29 years old. And I think it may have been some kind of like Australian cattle dog or an Australian shepherd or something. But yeah, with my dog, for a dog in general, did I just sound really like New Englandy or Boston-y there? For a dog, I don't even know, that's more like New York, I don't know. But for a dog in general, 10 or 11 years isn't too shabby, especially when you're talking about larger breeds. But when it's a small breed that can live up to 19 or 20 years, or even sometimes they say like 14 years is usually like the expected minimum for a Chihuahua. So when you're just as attached as I was to her, and when she should have had, in a best case scenario, maybe even another decade in front of her, and when you're just as emotionally invested in a dog as I was with her, it was just brutal. And so I was just a blubbering mess. And I felt like I didn't even know if I'd be able to make it in the place without just being a heap of crying jelly, And did I mention that, I'm trying not to worm this vegan stuff in here all the time, but I mentioned jelly. And gelatin is another food I've phased out of my diet because I discovered a long time ago, actually, but it was still one of those foods that I would allow myself, that gelatin, brand name Jell-O and stuff, is basically made from rendered down like cow or pig skin or bones and hoofs or whatever it is. So I think it's like rendered down from the connective tissue and maybe like collagen or keratin or whatever. That's where Jell-O comes from. Jell-O is like this thing that's, everyone sees it as so this innocent fun time dessert. And it's actually made from rendered down slaughtered animals or whatever. So neither here nor there. But one of the things that helped me lose a lot of weight is I replaced like junky snacks with like pickles and Jell-O and carrots and like Jello, even Jello that's not sugar free, even regular Jello. It's got like somewhere in between like 5 to 25 calories, depending on if it's artificially sweetened or if it's got actual sugar or whatever in it. So that like, so like after like I would eat a heavy lunch, and then from there on I would maybe eat a light supper, and at night if I got like the hungry horrors, I would like eat like a couple of kosher pickle spears, maybe like a carrot or a couple of apples, and Jello. Jello was like the closest thing to junk food I'd let myself eat at night, and that actually I think that kind of thing that helped me lose a lot of weight. So anyway, how I went from slobbering mess or to actually talking about literal Jello. But anyway, so I didn't know, and I still feel like shit. I feel like I owed it to her to be there in her final moment. But I was thinking, between the pain and the fentanyl and knowing her behavior from the past, like, it's funny, like, she was never really afraid of the vet. You could easily hand her off to a vet tech. But it's funny, like I said, she had that feisty attitude. If a vet tried to like give her like a rectal thermometer or tried to open up her mouth to look at her teeth, she'd start giving attitude or maybe do like a little warning snap, but not touch you or break skin. And so you could hand her off to a vet tech and she didn't mind being examined. But if you tried to do something that made her uncomfortable, she'd be like, I'm warning you, knock it off. You know what I mean? So my only solace was that knowing that she's not afraid of strangers and that she was probably doped out on the fentanyl and that she would be out like a light the second they gave her the injection, that kind of made me feel a little less like a piece of shit for not being there with her. And also I knew I was going to meet like family or be in touch with family afterwards and face to face. And I was thinking about that too, that this is probably likely I wouldn't have contracted coronavirus from going into this building and saying goodbye from my dog. But that was like something I was thinking about too, because what if I go into this, this veterinary hospital where there's all these people around, and we know that I don't think anyone has to worry, and this will get into like, I've been thinking about letting a new animal into my heart. And I don't know if there's ever been any cases of coronavirus being spread from a dog to a person, but we do know most likely it started with either a bat and or a pangolin and may have started in one of these Chinese wet markets. So, and I think there was at least one recorded case of a dog with coronavirus. But so I'm thinking I might be, potentially going into a building where there's people and animals, and we're supposed to be taking every precaution possible to not expose ourselves, And in a way, I feel like I'm being a chicken shit. Like, I think the real reason why I didn't go in and say goodbye to her was just I was so overcome with emotion. I didn't know if on top of it, I'd be able to stand the sight of her being put to sleep. But all I can picture is her little eyes. And I don't even know if she had her eyes open at that point or if she was just passed out from the fentanyl. And wondering if she was wondering where I am. And that absolutely kills me and just breaks me. You know what I mean? And so when I drove home, right from the parking lot, I was like knuckles white because of how hard I was gripping the steering wheel. And I was pissed and I was heartbroken at the same time. And I'm like gripping the steering wheel with all my might, like white knuckles. And at the same, through like clenched teeth, I'm just like through my sobbing, I'm saying like, motherfucker, I'm going, why this isn't fair? You know what I mean? And I'm like, it was one of those things where even though I don't believe in God, I was mad at God or the idea of God. Because I'm thinking, oh, there's people out there who actually believe in a just and loving God and all this stuff. And I'm thinking that the most innocent creature I ever knew was just put to sleep because its body was ravaged by a cancer, most likely. And it spent the last 2 days or whatever, and unbeknownst to me, I was probably not fully aware just of how much pain she probably was in. And I'm like, I don't know, like, if a being as good as her, as innocent as her, could be ravaged by disease and could experience that type of thing. And I'm wondering, and I was just like, I was just bawling, hot tears, my whole like body heaving and just cursing through clenched teeth, saying like every swear that would come to my mind and just, over and over again, why, you know what I mean? It was crazy. I don't know. I think part of the grieving process is guilt. And obviously, you can probably tell I still feel guilt. And I'm feeling guilt like maybe if I had caught it sooner or something, even though I could turn that around on the vets, why didn't they catch it sooner? Or why did the vet, when I was explaining her, I think doing a pretty damn well good job of describing her symptoms to him, instead of telling me to rush her to a vet, was telling me to just start a medical journal? And why was the cardiologist who had looked at the ultrasound and the x-rays just noted that that her belly was distended, but she's not in pain and no fluid wave, and didn't send anything over to my vet about how this dog might potentially have a tumor or something? And what's funny is I found out, and I was never able to get back to the guy, their cardiac or whatever department. It was kind of hard to get in touch with. For some reason, they called the old number, my parents' number they had on the books. And my father was like, we got a call from the doctor, and he was saying that he had something he wanted to discuss, but it wasn't a big deal. And my father was like, well, you can tell me, I'm his father. And my parents have, interacted with Olive and all that stuff. But the guy wouldn't say what it was. He just said it wasn't a big deal. And so part of me is wondering, was that the thing he was telling me about? And I'm like ripping myself apart over it. And he's like, and then I'm like, but wait, why would he say it wasn't a big deal if it was a potential tumor? And why wouldn't he have, when he was handing over, transferring the records of the appointment over to my vet, why wouldn't he have mentioned it to my vet that there was something like that? He just noted what he put in the notes I took home: distended belly, but no fluid wave, no pain. Because supposedly if it was bad, she would have had pain in the abdomen if it was something serious. So I've been totally lashing myself about this, asking myself if there's something I could have done. And so this is interesting. And I noticed, because this kind of got me thinking about not just theodicy, but when the rubber meets the road, what are your real feelings about the chances of an afterlife? You know what I mean? Kind of intuitively. It's funny because this is like I told you guys how I had a friend also named Phil. And my life is very strange. I'm like, now I'm thinking about all this. A friend, if I wasn't an atheist or a skeptic, I'd think it was kind of spooky. A friend also named Phil who died on October 8th, my birthday. And I'm not trying to say, woe is me, I have a friend who died. Because this is someone that I didn't hang around with that often. We often did, he was living at home, and he had kind of yo-yoed back home. So we did a lot of work for him and his mother at the mother's house. And I would see him and talk to him then. So I'm not trying to like take out the world's, tiniest violin for me. It was just like a weird coincidence that this person who I knew him well enough to consider him a friend, died on my birthday. But I remember, and to be honest, I felt bad for him. I felt bad for his mother. And when I heard the news, it froze me in my tracks, and it was very kind of surreal. And I did feel bad, but I did not cry. And I don't know what that says about me, but I think it's kind of normal, good or bad, that people get more attached to their pets than they do to people they, even people they would call a friend, but they see every so often. You know what I mean? Had this been like one of the guys in my band, then I may have well cried, but I felt bad. And even though, I'm an atheist, agnostic atheist, so I wasn't going to pray for him, but I do what I usually do when someone that I respect dies, I try to at least honor them, even though they're not going to receive my thoughts, I try to honor them in my mind. I think about them. I try to offer them like a tip of the hat, like a final salute, like that, You were a good person, man. I'm sad you're gone. And maybe sometimes I'll say to myself, I doubt there's a heaven or an afterlife, but if there is, I hope you're in the best place possible, or whatever. Or I might whatever that means, saying you're sending your best wishes or thoughts to the survivor of someone who died. Yeah, it doesn't mean that much. Prayers certainly, in my view, don't mean much. I don't think they're going to accomplish anything. Actually, the only thing I think that prayers and well wishes can do when someone else dies is they can at least offer some degree of comfort to the survivor, to the loved ones of the deceased. Because it can feel, when you're lost in grief, that at least getting that little ray of sunlight when someone lets you know they cared about the person who died, they care about you and your loss and what you're going through, and they are using that, what I often talk about, what I think is possibly an evolved capacity for empathy, as we're a social species. When they use that empathy, to let you know that they are thinking of you and they feel for you. They're kind of figuratively, across the internet or whatever, lowering their head and putting their hand on your shoulder. I think it is a good gesture in that sense. I don't think prayers have any supernatural efficacy, or they can't do anything other than maybe they make the person doing the praying feel good, and maybe at least they do good for the other person, that it lets them know you're thinking of them and they're not alone. I experienced a similar thing I'm going to discuss in the case of both the loss of my dog and the loss of that friend, that when that friend died, it was kind of like a reality sandwich. Okay, so here I am, someone who's an agnostic atheist, someone who believes we can't definitively prove with 100%, accuracy or whatever, that there isn't a God or an afterlife. It's like trying to disprove a negative. I can't prove definitively whether or not, Santa Claus or, flying pink unicorns exist. But most of us would probably agree, no, No, we know those things don't exist. It's just that technical hang up where you can't disprove a negative. But most rational people would agree those things don't exist. Like if I said there's a little pink elephant in my room, you can't see him because he's invisible, and whenever you go to touch him, he steps to the side. So you can't disprove that definitively, but all of us, who are of sane mind, know there's not a little pink invisible elephant in my room. And I will say, in fairness to believers, I think it's probably a little different when you get into something like the question of a god or a creator, because you can bring in, you can say, well, maybe the existence of a creator is a little more probable than pink unicorns or whatever, or fairies and elves, because we do have the problem of trying to figure out, how does something come from nothing? And of course, like we have minds out there, scientific minds, who do a good job of trying to explain how something actually can come from nothing, and how what we consider nothing might actually be a kind of bubbling quantum brew, as I think Lawrence Krauss puts it. But then again, to be fair, you can kind of say, well, technically, isn't that bubbling quantum brew still something? And I think, are we still allowed to mention Lawrence Krauss on the show? Remember the whole thing with Christina Rad and all these kind of sexual misconduct allegations or accusations against him? But I'm kidding. I know technically this is my show, so I can talk about whatever I want. And so even before all that stuff went down, I was never the biggest fan of Lawrence Krauss. And I thought he could be kind of too dismissive when he would, I can't believe I'm digressing to talk about Lawrence Krauss. But even before the sexual stuff ever went down or whatever, or those allegations were brought up, I like Lawrence Krauss kind of rubbed me in the wrong way. Not rubbed me sexually in the wrong way, but like he rubbed me the wrong way because I would watch debates that Lawrence Krauss would do with theists. And I thought he had a shitty debate style, to put it frankly. Like, I thought people like Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist. So I think he's really kind of in a good place to be talking about evolution, things like that. I think Sam Harris is well versed on philosophy. Christopher Hitchens was just all around, I think a very learned, well-read, well-educated guy. And Hitch did have a really kind of caustic, which I think we loved about him, sometimes a kind of caustic and combative attitude, but he always did it in a very kind of, and sometimes it kind of like, here I am, kind of accusing Lawrence Krauss of being dismissive in a kind of negative way. Maybe it's hypocritical of me, where I think Christopher Hitchens could be dismissive in a really kind of smooth, effortless way, kind of both entertaining yet witty. I have memories of him leaning back in his chair, relaxed, legs crossed, pen dangling from his hand, and he'd deliver one of those famous Hitch slaps, these great little witty, barbed one-liners. I used to love those. But I think Lawrence Krauss, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, you can let me know, but I think with Lawrence Krauss, we have this guy who's a very talented and accomplished physicist, a very intelligent guy. Definitely not going to take that away from him. In fact, the reason why I invoked his name is because I was going to say I think he has some very interesting things to say about how we could potentially, get a universe from nothing. I believe that was the name of his book, right? A Universe from Nothing. But I don't think he's as eloquent as a Dawkins or a Hitchens. And I don't think he's nearly as well versed on religion or Christianity specifically as Dawkins is and as Hitchens was, past tense, sadly. And I believe Dawkins probably has a pretty good grasp of religion due to his English Christian upbringing. Yeah, I believe he was confirmed into the Church of England, the C of E, and I think he says that he pretty much closed the door on literal belief in religion or whatever somewhere in his teens. That's the case with me too, actually. And in the case of Christopher Hitchens, I think, he was a highly literate, highly well read person and author in his own right, of course. And I think as a work of literature, he was very well acquainted with the Bible. But I think in the case of Krauss, as someone with a relative lack of familiarity with biblical text or whatever, it's almost as if his debate style comes across as boiling down to science is awesome, religion is stupid. You know what I mean? And in some ways, as a non-believer, I'd agree with him. There's certain things I actually like about various religions, things that I might even find, or aspects that I find compelling or moving. But when people insist on taking this stuff, literally, I think that then it is, it's kind of silly, not to mention potentially dangerous. Despite my kind of fascination with mysticism and my kind of romantic or poetic leanings, at the end of the day, when you back me into a corner and ask me what I actually believe is realistically, objectively true, I'm like a scientific materialist at the end of the day. And so I think he's right when he says, literally believing in these religious, superstitious faith claims, it's stupid. These things aren't actually true, and you're ignorant for, if you believe these things are, literally true or whatever. If you believe that Muhammad flew up to the moon on a flying horse and cut it in half or whatever it is, or that someone literally, a corpse like a zombie, or, what I know it's kind of a crude comparison, but if you believe someone literally walked on water or rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, that, yeah, I think it's kind of just, you can argue it's ignorant to believe that literally. But when you're in a debate and you're up against a skilled and well-educated apologist, you probably have to do a little better or go a little deeper than just religion is foolish, But if you're up against someone like that, like a skilled Christian apologist, I think it helps if you're knowledgeable enough about religion that you can kind of go beneath the surface and kind of get into specifics and offer examples, that help to illustrate just how man-made religions actually are. Christianity specifically, if you're up against a Christian apologist. Yeah, so I think it is more effective when you have someone who has a really knowledgeable understanding of the history of religion, of what, someone like a Bart Ehrman, who can, Bart Ehrman used to, I've actually been getting back into Bart Ehrman recently. Is it Ehrman or Ehrman? But those who have been with me from the beginning, you might remember my early episodes where I'd talk about Bart Ehrman and I'd joke about like how I didn't know how to pronounce his name. Sometimes I'd even use his middle initial, Bart D. Ehrman. And I'd say it really fast, so it sounded very odd. But anyway, I know I saw something I wanted to mention on the show. He recently was on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable podcast or whatever, and you can watch the video version of it on YouTube. And Bart Ehrman was sitting across from another biblical scholar who, unlike Bart, is still a believer. And they were going back and forth on things like the reliability of the Gospels, whether the different accounts can be harmonized, the dating and authorship of the Gospels, stuff like that. So Bart Ehrman was coming at from the point that, given what we know of the Bible and how it was kind of scribally crafted, its kind of evolution, given what we know about all that, that the takeaway is probably that, we shouldn't be taking this thing literally. You know what I mean? and it's obviously man-made. And his opponent, his interlocutor, was coming at it from the point that, yeah, once again, that this is someone who's looked at the same evidence as Bart. This is someone who's also been schooled in Greek, in Latin, etc., in Aramaic, and his takeaway is that, you know, these early texts reinforce his belief in Jesus, that he, and Jesus as a supernatural Messiah. I believe Bart Ehrman isn't a mythicist. I think Bart Ehrman actually he believes pretty solidly in that there most likely was a historical Jesus. He doesn't believe that this historical Jesus thought of himself as a supernatural messianic figure. He may or may not have seen himself as a Messiah, because traditionally the Jewish concept of the Messiah was of someone who is a kind of earthly conqueror, a kind of warrior king, chosen and anointed by God, but not a supernatural being who would physically rise from the dead and that kind of thing. And I think I was just talking about this on the show in a recent episode, but they also discuss the influence of Greek philosophy, namely Platonism and Aristotelian philosophy, on early Christianity or early Christian thought. And I could be wrong, but I thought Bart Ehrman was kind of talking about how this, at least in part, could have something to do with that shift we see. Traditionally, Judaism didn't really place too much of an emphasis on an afterlife. But of course, in Christianity, we see this evolving idea of, there's a heaven above, a hell below, and that we exist somewhere after bodily death, this kind of dualistic view. And I don't know if it was in the same episode. I've been binge watching Bart Ehrman videos, but I heard him talk about something I've heard him talk about many times in the past, how to first century Jews, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, wasn't going to be elsewhere. It wasn't some supernatural or ethereal or celestial realm up above us in the sky somewhere. Heaven was going to be on the earth, and that the end of days wasn't going to be the physical destruction or end of this world. Their eschatological view, or their eschatology, would have been the end of time, the end of days refers to the current evil or wicked age. And when I say current, I'm referring to current to those people at the time. Not our time, although there's plenty of Christians. Actually, this has been going on since the first century. Christians waiting for the return of the Messiah. And each generation is so sure that's going to happen in their time. And isn't it in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus is talking about, like the signs of the end times or whatever, in that, or the return of the Messiah. And he famously says something to the effect that this generation will not pass before, these things have transpired. And so the first Christians, or the early Christians, thought that the return of Jesus, the return of the Messiah, was going to take place in their time, and 2,000 years later, and, everyone's still waiting. And so to reiterate, for, first century Jews, the end of days would have been the end of the current wicked age, and the kingdom of heaven would be on the earth. And it's funny, the word apocalypse has come to be, this very kind of scary word with associations of, the destruction of the world, etc. When I think it's from the Greek, and all it really means is to reveal, a kind of lifting of the curtain or something like that. Yeah, now I'm trying to think of the actual Greek word. It's something like apocalypsis or apocalypsis. Maybe I should actually take a look. Yeah, it's from the Greek, and it means basically revelation or to reveal. Yeah, to uncover, unfold, something like that. But speaking of this idea that the kingdom of heaven would be on the earth, that it wasn't some other realm, there's this line from the Gospel of Thomas, one of the apocryphal or outside texts, not a part of the canonical Bible. And I believe the Gospel of Thomas is considered a Gnostic gospel. But there's a line from it that I've always carried with me that I actually really love, despite the fact that I'm a godless non believer. It almost had like an Eastern philosophical, almost a Buddhist type of feel to it. Where is it? The kingdom of heaven is spread out on the earth, and yet men do not see it. Kind of this idea that well, I think if you look at it through a kind of Buddhist lens, it does have that thing like heaven or nirvana is here and now, in a sense. You just need to cleanse your perception or be looking out through the right eyes, so to speak, It's the wonder of existence or being tuned into the oneness of everything here in the present. I can't say I know definitively what the author intended, but it does have that ring of the perennial philosophy. Also, it's got kind of a Timothy Leary-esque Aldous Huxley thing going on, but I've always really liked that. But Bart Ehrman was talking, and if you're not familiar, Bart Ehrman is this biblical scholar who started off as a kind of believing fundamentalist, Christian. I don't know if fundamentalist is fair, but definitely a kind of, believing Bible thumping Christian. And he learned through his study of the New Testament and through his study, that required him to learn biblical Greek and, Latin, Aramaic, etc., that he kind of learned how the sausage was made. And it led him to a kind of full realization of just how man-made the Bible is. And I believe he refers to himself as an agnostic. And to be fair, he does quote something else as the reason why he's a non-believer, not just for these academic, reasons. That he's well educated on the subject and he's able to clearly see the interpolations, the contradictions, etc. But his other reason why he's not a believer is theodicy. He personally has trouble reconciling the belief in a good or just or loving God with all the suffering and iniquity in the world. And I always say this, and what apologists or a lot of Christians will say is it's our fault. It's our fault the world is the way it is. We're living in a fallen world or a fallen state because of Adam and Eve. And like I joked not long ago on the show, I'm like, that makes God look even worse. 2 people ate the wrong kind of fruit, and now all of us are punished with it, punished with death and unimaginable suffering and misery and iniquity. And maybe you can say, well, man's inhumanity of the man. Maybe, you can chalk that up to mankind. But even then, that's kind of messed up because it's still, it kind of implicates God too. Because if God knew everything from the beginning of time, was fully aware, had everything mapped out of how his creation was going to unfold, all the decisions everyone was going to make, if he allowed it that humans could harm other humans, somehow, it's implying that because of original sin in the fall in the garden, it was then permitted somehow that man was able to sin or transgress against his fellow man. So God, even then, even when you want to talk about man's inhumanity of the man, God is still implicated somehow. But, maybe Christians might have a little bit of a foothold to say, in those instances, it's our fault. And I would agree. Those things, like the greatest evils in human history, the greatest examples of man's inhumanity, the man, the Holocaust, etc. I think, yeah, that is the fault of human beings. You know what I mean? But I don't think it has anything to do with original sin or the fall in the garden. Or, I think that's like a cop-out. But certainly, there's things like disease, natural disasters, where hundreds or thousands of people are wiped out, by natural happenstance, or I don't know how to word it correctly. Whatever it is, just natural factors like shifting tectonic plates or, whatever it is that causes tsunamis. When I think of tectonic plates, I think of earthquakes. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, unscripted once again, I think tsunamis are also caused by kind of like underwater earthquakes, plate tectonics or whatever, right? Hopefully. But yeah, so when you get into the realm of natural disasters and when, people are just wiped out by the raw forces of nature, I mean, you can't brush that off as man's inhumanity, the man. I mean, where's God and all that? But yeah, getting back to I think at the beginning I said I offered the caveat or disclaimer that this might be like an hour-long special of a guy rambling on about losing his pet, but actually it looks like it's going to be at least a 2-hour special or episode about a guy rambling on about the loss of his pet. But yeah, to get back to the point I was making about theodicy and kind of the rubber hitting the road and how a personal loss can really clarify your opinion on things like whether or not there's life after death. So when my friend passed away, and I said, even, and it's kind of so cold to say, I did feel bad for him and his family, but I didn't break down in tears like I did for the loss of, for Olive. And Olive, she was a family member. She was, people often, maybe it's cringe-inducing to some people. People throw around the term fur baby. She was definitely my fur baby. I'm trying to articulate what the bond is like, but this might sound over the top to some people, or sound like I'm comparing animals to having a kid, which in a way I guess I kind of am. Never, I don't have any offspring out there, but I think I don't know where the saying comes from, but I thought I heard someone say before that having a kid is like having, or maybe it was just in a TV show or something, I don't know. Having a kid is like, wearing your heart outside your chest. That having someone that means everything to you and you're constantly worrying that something might happen to them or whatever. And I think being a loving pet owner is like that, especially when you know that right out the gate, unless it's, one of those parrots that live longer than we do, or Galapagos tortoise or something, right out the gate that another kind of cliche, but it's an apt one I've heard, people say before, is that when you buy a pet, it's like you're investing in a future tragedy or heartbreak. That pets, relatively speaking, are short-lived compared to us, but we bond so deeply with them. But at some point, we are going to have to deal with that loss. And also, I mean, whether it's a dog or a cat, unless it's some big, scary breed or something, or even if it is a big breed, we still know that our pets have this kind of childlike innocence, so we're afraid if they get out, they could get lost or someone could do something awful to them. So you're always worrying in that sense, you know? But yeah, even faced with the loss of, say, someone you care about, you notice their absence, but you weren't super, super close. You know what I mean? I still remember there was something about the kind of sharp or stark reality of being told that someone who existed yesterday that you knew, that they were now gone suddenly, bam, gone from the world. You know what I mean? They no longer exist. And there was hopefully, I don't think his mother will ever hear this. I think I showed that same concern when I was talking about this before. I'm like, I hope this person's mother never hears this, because they may be religious and they may take some kind of solace in the idea that maybe their son lives on, in some afterlife or something. But as someone who knew him as a friend slash acquaintance or whatever, who knew him enough to be taken aback by the news of his loss, it really kind of brought things into focus to me, because I feel like when I'm just at my normal baseline, someone who happens to be an agnostic, atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, going through life, I'm like, yeah, I think I have pretty solid reasons for why I doubt the afterlife or a personal God or something like that. Yeah, but who knows? I guess, maybe there's a small possibility, but when I hear that someone dies, it's when it really hammers home the reality for me, that at least from my looking out from my eyes, that I really don't think there's an afterlife. I mean, there's just something about that stark knowledge that's, like I said, someone you knew is now gone. Their physical body just stopped. It's like an old computer that doesn't function anymore. The lights are off and no one's home. You know what I mean? It just sounds really, really cruel, but it's like they might as well be a stack of cordwood. It's dead matter. I don't know how long it technically takes for all the organic matter to break down or for all cellular activity to cease. I imagine there's probably, bacteria having a field day, a lot of kind of recycling or whatever. But you know what I'm saying. It's they might as well become complete. It might as well be, inert matter. That the body's, all it's left is a rotting or preserved husk. The person you knew, I mean, where'd they go? Was their intelligence, magically translated to some supernatural realm somewhere? It's like, and I feel like I have a lot of kind of well thought out, objective reasons, for why I don't believe in a God or an afterlife. I'm a guy with a graphic design degree, so I don't want to say academic reasons or whatever. But, I think I have well thought out, rational, intellectual reasons why I doubt the existence of a higher power and afterlife. But I think just like intuitively, when I hear that someone dies, it drives home my, or reinforces my unbelief. I'm like, okay, that person's, that thing that was them, the human mind, as Christopher Hitchens used to say, we don't have bodies, we are bodies. That's what he used to say. And I guess, in a way you can argue there's something like the soul. You can say that, our psyche, our mind, that at least poetically or, figuratively speaking, that you can call that a soul, or you could use that interchangeably or metaphorically for that thing, which is us, which thinks and looks out from our eyes, you know. But yeah, I mean, it sounds really cold, and it's not what I want to be true. But when I'm faced or confronted with the death of someone, whether it be a celebrity or someone I knew or a beloved pet, it's like, just intuitively, I'm like, I think it seems like to me, like, the flame went out. All it's left is the dead body. And it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't feel, even on an intuitive level, like I said, all intellectual, well thought out reasons why I don't believe. It just on an intuitive level, in my gut, it doesn't feel true or likely or realistic that the person's mind or self, whatever you want to call it, their psyche, went to borrow from the Greek, went to some other realm, some afterlife. It just doesn't seem likely. And for, say, like the case with my dog, I would love to believe that my dog was able to conquer death or survive death. And I think my father, whenever a dog would die, used to talk about, half jokingly, they're now running around in what he called the happy hunting ground or whatever, or the happy hunting grounds. I think the only drawback or negative scenario I could think of my dog being in some kind of heaven or something like that is that maybe she's confused or scared that I'm not there and wondering where I am. You know what I mean? But say someone like me, I want to believe with all my being that she is still somewhere. But I just feel in my gut, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like figuratively, she lives on in my memory. And I've always hated that. I've always hated when people talk about loved ones living on in their memory. Because I'm like, that is a paltry excuse for an afterlife. What the hell does it mean to live on in someone's memory? It may be good for the person doing the remembering. It makes them feel good and warm. They can remember you. But you're most likely, your individual self is obliterated. You're not even aware of a cold black darkness. You just don't. Your consciousness just doesn't even exist. So what the hell does living on someone's memory do for you? But I do get a solace in a sense of the warmth I feel for her even after she's gone, and the memories. And of course, I'd like to believe that she's not truly dead, that she endures somehow. But, it's like, and you could get into a philosophical argument, when do you cease to be? If we are our bodies, kind of looking at it in that Christopher Hitchens type of way, is your dead body you? Or, I don't know. It's like, it's weird. Like, I had this other kind of like disturbing thought regarding my dog. I was wondering, is there something like, do we on some level endure longer than we would think, a little bit or a little lot, after what we would call clinical brain death? Is there something on some kind of subconscious level? Like, is there a hint, a kind of receding little hint of consciousness, after you've been declared dead? And I was wondering, will my dog's laying on that cold veterinary table or sealed up in a bag in a freezer? It's like, is there something like a little flicker of consciousness that hasn't fully gone out yet, and she's wondering why I'm not coming to get her? And oh, that totally kills me, man. It's horrible. But then, yeah, I remember, like, while I was thinking about all this, it reminded me of something that I used to think about, like, jokingly. Like, when a loved one dies, And I think I thought about this after, like, thinking sometimes with my grandmother. It really hit me when my grandmother died. And I was still pretty young when that happened. And over the years, I'd think about, death. And in a way, would ghosts or something kind of being a bad thing? Like, I think about like the negative, but almost comedic implications of your loved ones living on as ghosts. I mean, when are they around? I mean, would you want like your grandmother's ghost unbeknownst to you in the room while you're, jacking off in front of your computer or something? Like a dead loved one seeing you masturbating or while you're on the toilet. You know what I mean? I think we all like to think of that. We'd all like to believe that our loved ones live on and that they're looking after us. But do they politely turn their heads when we're sitting on the john or something? I mean, are they always around? But that doesn't prove that ghosts aren't real. But there's plenty of like rational, intellectual, objective reasons why I don't believe that ghosts are real. But I think that's kind of funny considerations about what could be the downside of this. Of if our loved ones did exist on as ghosts. But yeah, I remember I was kind of. It is funny because I'm the type of person where I try to prepare myself. Obviously being an atheist, an agnostic atheist, whatever. Someone who I like to think I'm at least naturally philosophical, even though I'm not as well schooled on academic, on philosophy from in the academic sense. I'm someone who naturally likes to think a lot about the nature of existence, and someone who thinks a lot about death, as morbid as that might sound. But when I'm at my base level, when I'm not experiencing personal loss, I find it kind of interesting and stimulating to think about, the nature of reality, of life and death, and so being someone who contemplates death a lot, I often try to like steel myself for the inevitable loss of loved ones. And I would even try to steel myself for the loss of my dog. It's like, I know it's inevitable. And I know dogs have these really unfairly, kind of shortened lifespans in comparison to our own. You know what I mean? And then it's funny, kind of, once again, kind of like dark humor regarding death. And I'd often think about things like how there's like parrots and, tortoises that like far outlive a lot of people, human beings. I'm like, yeah, it's not just dogs. We're getting kind of shortchanged in that department too. And it's even worse with, I think it has to do with metabolic rate and things like that. But then you get like things like mice and hamsters. It's like, you get a pet hamster and it's also a mammal. It's got most of the same like anatomical equipment we do, a nervous system and everything. And those poor little guys, they're lucky if they live 2 years. You know what I mean? But I would try to like, and this is true of both human loved ones I've lost and animals. You try to steel yourself and prepare yourself, but no matter how intellectually you try to prepare, no matter how rational you try to be, emotion is just like the emotion you experience during the deep loss of someone you care about, a beloved dog or a human. It's weird how that raw emotion doesn't care how intellectual or rational you try to be. It just breaks through that ice, that surface. And I really experienced that when, it dawned on me and came up from a deep place when all of a sudden I heard, that, here I was having a real conversation about how my dog was about to be euthanized. This dog who I've owned for 11 years, who I don't want, offend parents by saying, people who have human children by saying I loved it like a child, but I love this dog so much, and every day when I left for work or whatever, even to go out food shopping, it hurt to leave because I would lock eyes with that dog and see its innocent face looking up at me like it didn't understand why I was going out the door. You know what I mean? To have this little being that was such a part of my life and hear that they were about to be put down and me giving my permission for it, it's like all this raw emotion just raged and swelled and broke through the ice of my rational, you know, facade or veneer or whatever. And it's like I realized that some emotion can just be so powerful and raw, and sometimes we don't have any control over it. And that was all. And I remember, and here I get to something I want to talk about. I don't know why, but I remember when, yeah, it has to do with the topic of sad music and kind of listening to sad music and digging into your own wounds. You know what I mean? And it's something that started for me when I was probably in my early teens. You know, you start having like, my first, little relationships, having, girlfriends and these short kind of like lived, little middle school or high school relationships. And, it's very emotional and powerful. You're new to romantic love and, all your hormones are kind of swelling and everything. And, I can remember like when I'd lose a girlfriend or whatever, I would just lock myself in my room and listen to really sad music. And man, it really was just like the emotional equivalent of digging into your own wounds or, pouring salt on your wounds or whatever. And it's weird because on the one hand, it feels kind of cathartic that you're getting all this out of your system. But on the other hand, it can seem kind of, and maybe is, kind of unhealthy, because you're like steeping yourself in all of this negative emotion. And I don't know to be honest, I don't know if it's doing, I don't know if it does more harm than good or what. I honestly don't know. But I imagine you can look at it from different ways. Like I said, it's on the one hand, you could see it as being cathartic, and maybe it is. On the other hand, you could see it as being kind of almost like this morbid emotional self-indulgence where you're just steeping yourself morbidly in all this negative emotion. I don't know. And kind of dragging the process out. I don't know. But when my dog Picasso died, I remember, this is how long ago it was. That WB show Smallville about Superman, the early years, that was still on. I remember before his death I had watched an episode of Smallville, and something tragic had happened on the show between two of the characters or something. Maybe a character was killed off, I don't know, but they played this song by the Killers. It's funny, I've made fun of the Killers on the show. And I talk about, I think I had a YouTube video taken down for copyright infringement, but I did a response video to this kind of confrontation that occurred on some Scandinavian talk show where Richard Dawkins was pitted against Brandon Flowers, the lead singer of the Killers. I actually really like the Killers. I talk about how it came as like a big surprise to me when I found out Brandon Flowers is a devout Mormon. I'm like, the singer for the Killers is a devout Mormon? What the hell? Because, and maybe it has to do with, me buying into stereotypes. I don't know. But, Brandon, like the Killers, they're these, they were, or are, I think they're still around, this kind of alternative rock group who was influenced by some like old punk groups and new wave groups I like. Like they were heavily influenced by Joy Division. And Joy Division was this old kind of punk new wave group out of England. And this is a tragic story about the lead singer. And yeah, the story about the lead singer of Joy Division is pretty tragic. Ian Curtis. So Joy Division didn't last that long because I think they started out in the 70s, I think. Um, and I think he was only 24 when he committed suicide. When he committed suicide. But Ian Curtis, yeah, he was the lead singer for Joy Division. And I remember Joy Division is kind of an acquired taste. Like I remember when I was in like my late teens, early 20s, and started getting really into like old new wave groups and a lot of alternative groups and stuff. One of my favorite movies, I absolutely was like obsessed with the Brandon Lee film, The Crow. And that movie has such a great soundtrack. And that was part of what got me into like new wave and alt music and stuff. And I think Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails does a cover of a Joy Division song on that album. And I think also the guy who created the graphic novel that The Crow was based on, he listened to English bands like Pitch Shifter. Pitch Shifter is another great band. They kind of watered down over the years, but their early stuff is so savage and brutal. Early Pitch Shifter is some of my favorite music. And I think he also listened to Joy Division. And after Ian Curtis's suicide, the remaining members of Joy Division would go on to become New Order. And they have, if you heard them, you'd probably recognize some of their songs, like Blue Monday, Bizarre Love Triangle, stuff like that. Why the hell am I talking about? Oh, okay. Um, I was talking about sad music. But yeah, Joy Division, if you listen to Joy Division, the first time you hear it, you'll probably be like, what the hell is this? You might even laugh. Because Ian Curtis has a very distinctive vocal style. I've never heard anyone sing quite like him. But then it grows on you, and I actually love his voice. I love their music. I don't know how much of his unique vocal style might have been physiological in the sense that he suffered from bad epilepsy and would often have seizures. Um, but yet he also wrestled with depression. And when he was like 24, he hung himself. Uh, yeah, pretty dark stuff if this wasn't already a dark episode. I know exactly why I was talking about Joy Division in particular. It's because the Killers, the Killers, and Brendan Flowers, the singer specifically, were influenced by Joy Division. These other kind of gritty like new wave and alternative bands and stuff. And for some reason, that seems really weird for me that like a clean cut devout Mormon guy would like would like Joy Division and all that shit. I'm like, really? And and when I saw the clash between Richard Dawkins and Brendan Flowers, is it Brendan or Brandon? I don't know. But, I'm kind of rooting for Richard Dawkins, but I'm kind of vicariously cringing for the singer from the Killers, because he looks so like he just saw a ghost or whatever, or like I was gonna say something awful, like he just saw his dog die, and now we know, there's a reason why people use that saying or whatever that analogy, and he just looks like just kind of like sad and lost. He's just kind of staring forward with his mouth kind of open or something. Like Richard Dawkins is just point blank telling him why Mormonism is ridiculous and why it's illogical and wrong to believe in the ludicrous tenets of the faith, that there's this kid in upstate New York who found these magic golden plates, and that certain Native Americans were actually Jews who came over from Israel, and that Jesus appeared in North America after his crucifixion or whatever. Oh yeah, and there's certain things, and I think Richard Dawkins may have mentioned this specifically. I forget. I think I have heard him talk about this though. It's somewhere or at some point that there's something. Yeah, what's it called? I think it's called the Book of Abraham. But there's this this Mormon text, and Joseph Smith claimed that the Book of Abraham was written in something called "quote unquote" Reformed Egyptian, this ancient language. You know what I mean? And he actually had papyri, these old kind of tattered papyruses or whatever, papyri plural, that he claimed were, these were ancient Mormon texts, and they were written in Reformed Egyptian. Well, it turns out that to actual scholars, linguistic professors or whatever, experts, in their point of view, Reformed Egyptian don't exist. There ain't no such thing. Joseph Smith made it up. And those pieces of papyri or whatever, turns out he got them from, purchased them somewhere, because it did happen to be the fact that you used to be able to buy all sorts of things that were unearthed in in Egypt, bits of the ancient Egyptian world. There used to be awful things called I think they're called mummy parties or unwrapping parties, where people would gather together to unwrap an ancient dead person, or there's even examples when, mummies, believe it or not, used to be used for basically as cordwood, or mummy wraps used to be used as butcher paper and stuff like that. I'm not sure. There are a lot of mummies that were destroyed. I'm not actually going to fire up my iPad just in case what I'm saying is bullshit, but I don't think it does. I'll say mummies used as butcher paper. And here's the thing right away. Talks about mummies imported from Egypt, the bodies were stripped of their wrappings and used this. I don't know who he's talking about, but he's talking about a specific person. But he's saying, as such, he imported mummies from Egypt, stripped the bodies of their wrappings, and used this material for making paper. Several shiploads of mummies were brought to the mill in Gardner, Maine, and were thus used to make a brown wrapping paper for grocers, butchers, and other merchants. So sometimes I say stuff that sounds batshit crazy, but usually these little factoids I have in my head turn to check out. So, yeah. So anyway, yeah, the Mormon Book of Abraham is a known fraud. You can actually look at these papyri and see that they were original ancient Egyptian texts, but Joseph Smith tried to pawn them off as ancient Mormon texts that were written in quote-unquote Reformed Egyptian. So anyway, Richard Dawkins just completely takes the gloves off and just matter-of-factly tells Brendan Flowers to his face why Mormonism is bullshit. And I know I was kind of chiding Lawrence Krauss earlier for that kind of thing. But I think if you're someone like Richard Dawkins, who can, actually knows the facts and the history and can specifically tell you why a religion is man-made or whatever, and also I think if it's not in a debate setting, like this was actually, I feel kind of bad for Brendan Flowers. He was on to do an interview and they kind of ambush him all of a sudden, the hosts, that, we're also having Richard Dawkins here. Oh, Richard, why don't you come? I wonder what you'd say to Brendan Flowers, So I think he didn't even realize he was going to be pitted against Dawkins. But I think if you are an atheist debating a Christian apologist, I think that, it's not enough to just say religion's stupid or, your religion claims this happened and that happened. It's a bunch of bullshit. It's just to be like that dismissively. And I'm not saying this is out of kindness for the people on the other side of the argument. No, it's not about civility to me. It's about you should be able to make informed arguments that have a lot of weight behind them and show that you actually know your stuff and you know how the kind of sausage is made. Instead of just saying religious is stupid, you believe some guy walked on water 2,000 years ago. When you're debating a learned apologist who, very well, like the guy Bart Ehrman was facing, this is someone who you might not agree with their conclusion that there actually was a supernatural Jesus or whatever, and the miracles in the Bible really occurred. But these are people who may have very well studied, Greek, Aramaic, Latin, people who are extremely well educated, who know the ins and outs of these texts. I think it's better if you have someone who has a really good handle on the history of religion, when you're going up in a debate against an educated apologist. Someone who can tell you why, someone who can name the glaring contradictions in the Bible. Someone like a Bart Ehrman who can tell you that, really pivotal stories like the woman taken into adultery, how that wasn't originally in the gospel. It's a later add-on, a later interpolation. If you can tell someone that, say something like Jesus's prediction that the temple would be torn down, that this may be a kind of a retroactive prophecy, that it's not that Jesus actually said this thing and he said it before the temple was raised by the Romans in what was it, roughly 70 AD. It's probably more likely the case that a gospel writer wrote this work after the temple was destroyed and made it look like, not necessarily that they were trying to be duplicitous or deceptive, but for the sake of the narrative, they thought it would be powerful to have Jesus predict the fall of the temple. You know what I mean? But like I said, this was something that happened after. And whether or not you want to believe that, what you think about it probably depends on what your take is on the dating of specific gospels. And whether or not you're of the mind that this gospel was written after the historical raising of the temple by the Roman Empire. But yeah, so I think if I'm watching a debate and I just see someone kind of dismissively say, well, we've got science, blah, 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 your thing is stupid. You know what I mean? No, it's like, it is good if you can shore up your side of the argument by, illustrating the benefits of science and how important science is in, all different aspects of life and how much it's done for us, But at the same time, it's also good if you can, maybe instead of just saying there's ugly stuff in the Bible, if you can specifically point out what parts of the Bible do you think are ugly and archaic and immoral, which bits might be nice and maybe do have some value as far as moral instruction goes, but still, they shouldn't, it's not a book to be taken literally. And if you do have knowledge akin to someone like a Bart Ehrman, so you can point out how the sausage is made and why you shouldn't take the Bible literally and think that it was one solid book that drifted down from the heavens, completely written as if by God himself, or that it was, divinely inspired and written by a single author. It's funny. I think despite the fact that when you go to Sunday school or CCD and you're told right there that there's different gospels who are written by certain people, and we can get into, and I think Bart Ehrman and his opponent on that recent episode of Unbelievable, they actually do get into, the this point of contention whether or not the Gospels were written by the people they're claimed to be written by. I think I think the scholarly consensus seems to be that, and this is even if you're a Christian or whatever, and you might hear Christian scholars admit this, it's not that the person named in the title of a specific gospel is actually the one who wrote it, that it may very well be the case that these gospels were given like honorary titles. And I think it's been suggested, I think I've heard Bart Ehrman actually say this, that they were essentially anonymous. And then probably as a kind of dedication, they were named for, one of the apostles or something like that. So it's kind of like an honorific title. And there's different views. I think, some scholars may question whether or not Luke wrote Luke, but I think there's a lot of scholars who think that in the case of Luke might be an exception. The three gospels that seem to be named for apostles, Matthew, Mark, and John, those are thought to most likely have anonymous authors. And then Luke, I think Luke was the only Gentile out of the gospel writers. I think that's the consensus or whatever. And it's thought that Luke historically may have been a traveling companion of the apostle Paul. I think he was also supposedly a physician. So Luke may have written Luke. And I think there's theories about how Luke supposedly has a kind of advanced or sophisticated writing style that's in keeping with Greek literature. So this may have been someone who was learned and who was educated in the writing style of the Greek classics, etc. I know, and I've talked about this before on the show, that the book of Revelation and the idea of Judgment Day and the return of Christ, this plays such a big part in the minds of modern Christians. And yet it's thought, one theory is that the book of Revelation, its inclusion in the Bible may have been due to a case of mistaken identity, that that early church fathers thought that it was John the Apostle who wrote Revelation, where it turns out that it may very well have been another John, a person named John who was an exile living on the isle, the Greek isle of Patmos. But yeah, I guess the point I was trying to make is, it's funny, even when you go to Sunday school, you're told there's different gospel writers. So they're telling you right there that it wasn't, the Bible doesn't have one author. It's basically two big anthologies. You have the Old Testament, which is made up of various books, and you have the New Testament, which is made up of various books or various texts, But still, it's as if many Christians seem to almost operate as if they think the Bible was divinely inspired and it had, might as well have had one author. And they get a little uneasy when you start to explain, the number of authors involved in the Bible, how different books or different texts might contradict one another, the inconsistencies. When you start telling them about how some of the most important, I guess important is subjective, but how certain like pivotal stories might actually be interpolations or whatever, or key things might be scribal add-ons. And so I think it is good, if you're going to have someone who's debating a Christian apologist, a learned Christian apologist, that's good to have someone who has some knowledge of, the history of the New Testament, some grasp of the Old Testament and the fact that it's made by various it's made up of books and texts by various authors, some of them redundant, etc. In the early days of the show, I used to talk about these all the time. What the heck are they? Oh, yeah, I just remembered. Doublets. I used to talk about doublets a lot. Hell yeah, there are some portions of the Bible that either seem redundant or that may contradict one another. Some people might still try to harmonize them, like the fact that there's different accounts of the flood narrative, different accounts of how many animals were brought on the ark or whatever. And so once again, this isn't about civility to me. It's about the fact that if you're engaged with a learned, well-educated Christian apologist, and all you have to throw at them is, these generalities about how the Bible is stupid or whatever. You know what I mean? Maybe you can name one or two miracle stories you know of and say, oh, that's stupid. No one believes that. You're up against someone who, even though you might view it as being naive, and this, from my opinion, probably, I'd agree that it's naive, that despite all their learning, they still believe in these texts literally, in a certain sense, where they believe in where they believe in the miracle stories, they believe in a literal resurrection, etc. This is still a well-educated person who, as an apologist, they've been skilled to engage people, even people who are very knowledgeable about the Bible and all the contradictions and this and that. So you put them up against someone who all they can do is very generally say the Bible's stupid. I mean, they're going to be able to emphasize and focus on your lack of knowledge about, the history of world religion or the history of the New Testament or of religion in general, and use that against you and try to make you look ignorant. You know what I mean? I mean, you could argue there might be something for civility. If you can dismantle someone else's argument or worldview while doing it in a even-keeled, civil way, that might be more palatable. That being said, if you do know your stuff, I think it's okay to throw a few barbs too, and make things entertaining. And so, once again, I think this is why Christopher Hitchens was such a great, debater or opponent. And he was like the best kind of guy to put up against learned Christian apologists, because this was someone who was an author, who was well educated, very well spoken, very eloquent, and he could tell you why he didn't buy certain aspects of the Bible, and he could point out the weaknesses in the text. At the same time, he could also, just for good measure, take you down a peg and casually show you as being, absurd in your view or in your assertions or whatever. He was kind of the best of both worlds. He could dismantle your arguments in an eloquent, educated manner. At the same time, in his own suave kind of way, he could also kind of kick the chair from out of, kick the chair out from under you with a biting yet casually delivered remark. So this episode, well over 2 hours ago, started out being about my dog. And somehow I keep laying into Lawrence Krauss. I'm not sure why. Hopefully, I'm not being unfair. It's been a long time since I watched Lawrence Krauss debate anyone. And I think, like, let's say if you have a physicist who is isn't also kind of an armchair biblical scholar. I think there's still a place for people like that. There was a lot of unintended alliteration, lots of P's. Um, you know, it, Someone like Lawrence Krauss can use their knowledge of science and physics, and with just enough knowledge of the Bible and where it clashes with science. They can use their scientific knowledge to point out where the Bible or whatever religious text really gets it wrong. And I think that would be a better approach than just being dismissive. And I think it would be more impactful. So now we're about at the 3 hour mark, and so around the time my dog Picasso died, I'd become aware of the music of the Killers, and there was that one song they happened to use in a Smallville episode, but it's a song called, I think the actual title might be "Good Night, Travel Well." And it's just this really sad song, almost dirgeful, or like a dirge. And is dirgeful an actual word? I feel like it is, but just in case. Um, and I know I was just making fun of Brandon Flowers, but I don't know if he writes the lyrics for the Killers, or some bands, different band members write the lyrics to different songs or whatever. But I always assume, because in my band, it was always the case that I sang and I wrote the lyrics. So I tend to assume that other vocalists, lead singers, are the ones writing the lyrics. But if he is the sole lyricist, I don't know, then hats off to him for the lyrics to that song, because the lyrics to "Good Night, Travel Well" are absolutely unbelievable. And it's a song that expresses, like, the depth of mourning and grief so well. It's a song I even have to be careful of talking about it, because I don't want to tear up. And so I remember I was listening to the Killers after my dog died, and I heard that song, and it struck me. Oh man, it actually had me in tears. And I'm trying to think of the lyrics. Like, I think the first lyric might be, "The unseen distance to the great beyond stares back at my grieving frame." I'm gonna look it up. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it goes, "The unknown distance to the great beyond stares back at my grieving frame. To cast my shadow by the holy sun, my spirit moans with a sacred pain. And it's quiet now, the universe is standing still. There's nothing I can say, there's nothing we can do now." Yeah, so just whether he's a Mormon, whatever he is, extremely powerful lyrics, and they're kind of married with the perfect music. And I remember, yeah, I heard that after my dog died, and that song, oh, I listened to it a few times, almost like returning to, like that. Once again, I don't know if it's healthy or unhealthy, but that habit of emotionally digging into my own wounds after experiencing a loss. And for a lot, even, and so, yeah, I'll get to it. Don't ask me why. It might seem like a very kind of like a self-destructive or self-defeating thing to do. But the day after I came home, from crying and, having my dog euthanized, I listen to music while I'm riding my exercise bike. So I go on my exercise bike, and yeah, I did it. I fired up "Good Night, Travel Well." And I was just blubbering again, man. It was awful. And then after that, for good measure, I listened to Death Cab for Cuties. That band, I like that band. I used to love their song, When Soul Meets Body, or maybe it's just Soul Meets Body, I don't know. But I listened to their song, I'll Follow You Into the Dark. Let me find the lyrics to that one. Yeah, it's entitled I Will Follow You Into the Dark. And it's like a song dripping with sentimentality. It's a really kind of slow, kind of moving song. But yeah, I'm almost afraid to read them because it could make me cry now. You guys probably didn't know I could blubber like this, and it's not easy though. It takes something like I love my dogs. It takes something like the loss of a dog or the loss of a human loved one. Other than that, I don't cry easy. Yeah, love of mine, someday you will die, but I'll be close behind and I'll follow you into the dark. No blinding light or tunnels to gates of white, just our hands clasped so tight, waiting for the hint of a spark. If heaven and hell decide they both are satisfied and illuminate the no's on their vacancy signs, if there's no one beside you when your soul embarks, then I'll follow you into the dark. So just really powerful stuff. And almost like that Killers song, it really in a nice poetic way and in kind of a novel way, really distills that feeling of when you lose someone and that feeling of loss and separation. It's just powerful stuff. And so, wow, yeah, this has been over 3 hours. 3 hour unscripted episode. And so, yeah, oh my God, I gotta watch it, man. I almost feel the waterworks. And so, yeah, I've started looking at like classifieds and looking up breeders and stuff. It's funny. So I found this one breeder on Facebook, and they wanted, they say they make all prospective, puppy buyers to answer a questionnaire, and she instead of sending the questionnaire, she asked me, like, she has listed in a Facebook message the questions they tend to ask. It was things like, what kind of work do you do, how long are you away from home each day, are there children or other animals around. So I gladly answered all the questions. And so far, she hasn't gotten back to me because supposedly she has a dog that's expecting now. And of course, any ethical breeder will make you wait at least 10 weeks before you can bring a puppy home, before they can leave their mother. And so I want to kind of try to find out now if she sees me as a potential candidate. So I'm probably going to have to message her back because she didn't get back to me. And I just told a female friend who happened to get in touch with me, and I thought it was because maybe she saw that on the Weekend Out Facebook page that I mentioned my dog being euthanized. And I told her, and she was totally surprised because she actually really liked Olive. And there's even pictures of her like holding Olive and stuff. And so I was talking to her about it. And I kind of jokingly, I said, half jokingly, I hope she doesn't go through my Facebook pages and discover that I'm an atheistic chaos magician. And that's, I just put it that way because I thought it was funny and over the top. I don't buy into any of the superstitious implications of chaos magic any more than I believe in any of the superstitious claims, faith claims made by any of the world's religions. I don't believe in the supernatural, But for a while, I was interested in it, almost the way you might be interested in meditation, just for like a way to kind of explore your own consciousness and kind of fool around with your perception of reality or whatever. But I thought that was a fine way to put it. Like, if someone let's say I'm hoping they're not, but they might be. I think I may have seen like religious things on their Facebook page. So, obviously someone like me, what could go wrong if you're trying to buy a puppy and the person who's going to sell it to you is a religious person? I'm just thinking about worst case scenarios. Like they find my podcast, they find my Facebook, they find that I'm someone who applauds the work of the Satanic Temple, who does documentaries on things like Baphomet, someone who's a godless atheist, and who posts like kind of racy memes and stuff on their Facebook page. I thought that was kind of a funny way to put it in a nutshell. An atheistic chaos magician. But what someone might find, what kind of conclusion someone might come to when they weigh all the facts. Things like I'm an atheist. I'm fascinated with occultism and stuff like that. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. But man, I'm tired. I've been at this for 3 hours, so I'm gonna go to sleep. If you guys were able to actually make it this far in, I applaud you. And as always, thanks for listening. I love you, guys and girls, brothers and sisters out there. Until the next time.